Well, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. We're going to talk about ancestry.com beyond the basics. I have three main objectives today. One is to show you how to use search filters so that you can target your searches. Second is to show you how to use the ancestry.com card catalog. This will allow us to locate the specific record sets that we want and to search just those record sets. And then third is to show you how to organize your research to more efficiently search for just those records that you need. The sort of the standard basic ancestry.com function are these green leaf hints. And this is a screenshot from my own tree on ancestry.com. And there are lots and lots of these green leaf hints. These hints are generated through an algorithm that the ancestry.com website has created to try to identify records that will likely match the person of interest. There's a few problems with this. This is my current number of hints that exists on my tree. So I have almost 5,000 of them. So a number that is really just difficult to manage, difficult to efficiently look through and identify. Also, not all of these hints are going to match my target person. So out of those 5,000, I might find 50 that'll actually match the people that they are supposed to be matching. And then also, not all records that will match my target person will show up as hints. So I might not find all the records if I only pay attention to those green leaf hints. The other sort of basic function is this general search function. So this is the profile page for my third great grandfather, John Brink Conklin. When I click on this general search button, again, there is an algorithm that will pull in whatever records Ancestry.com thinks might be related to my John Brink Conklin. And when I click on that, I get almost 35,000 hints. So again, just a number that is very difficult to manage. So the question becomes, how do we search more efficiently? How do we identify what we want and figure out how to find it? Well, sort of the first step in doing that is to learn how to filter. Like many things in Ancestry, there are multiple different ways to do this. I'm going to go ahead and click into ancestry.com. The first thing that we're going to talk about is filtering, and there are a number of different ways to do this. If you go to the search button at the top of the Ancestry landing page, that's really the first level of filtering that you can do. By clicking on this area, it will allow you to search all collections. So these are all the record sets that Ancestry.com houses. Or you can search in particular types of record sets. So if I want to just search census records or birth records or military records, I can start that process just with this tab. Even inside of those general categories, so now I'm clicking on birth, marriage, and death, I can narrow that focus over here by narrow by category and just bring up a search function for birth records or marriage records or death records. And so that's sort of the first level of filtering. Another way to filter, let's go back to our search button and click on all collections. And this will bring up just this general search function, which most of you are probably familiar with. Let's say that I want to find records related to my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Hazel Conklin, and she lived in a very small town called Dimock, Pennsylvania. So if I restrict my record search to just Dimock, Pennsylvania, that will be another way of filtering. I will only get records that have on them Dimock, Pennsylvania. I want to show you another function that Ancestry has, which is not really related to filtering, but I think it's kind of an interesting function. It's a calculator function. So let's say I don't remember when my grandmother was born. I can click on that calculator and say, well, I think she was 85. in 1975, and it'll calculate her calculated birth year. So we are now again filtering Hazel Conklin, born about 1890, but specific to this location. And when I search that specifically, instead of getting 30,000 records, I just get 21. So a much more targeted approach to searching for records. If this is too targeted, there are ways to broaden that search right here in our search functions. So if I don't want just Dimmock, I can go back to the county of Susquehanna. I can go back to the adjacent counties. So this is another way of searching. We're going to go one more place, and I'm going to go into my tree, and we're going to find my grandmother and go to her profile page. And I'm going to push the search button for Hazel Conklin. And when I do that, I am going to get lots and lots of records. So again, 31,000. But if we look, this is actually the search parameters that Ancestry is using to perform this search. So all of those can be broadened or narrowed depending on how narrow of a focus that I want. So I can just search for first names of Hazel Loretta. I can search for exact and similar, and I can do that through all the areas where she has been identified in census records. Going to the bottom, I can also filter by type of record. So if I only want to look at Hazel Conklin in military records, pushing this will focus all records. It'll remove all 30,000 except for the 3,500 that are military records. Once we get to that page, you can filter even further based on what type of military records, what location, or what record date. So again, these are all methods to really filter or narrow your searches to make them more efficient. So we've now gotten to a little bit of information on how to filter, but we're still getting, lots and lots of records, and we want to really be a little bit more efficient in our searches. So that's going to require using the card catalog. So I'm going to go back into the card catalog. This is the card catalog for ancestry.com. The way that I get here is by searching card catalog, and that will bring me to this landing page. This page is a list of the 33,689 record collections that Ancestry has. Each of these collections has lots and lots of records associated with them. You can see from this first record set, there are, I think that's 35 million records that are associated with that. There are multiple different ways to view these record collections, and you can sort them. The way I have them sorted here is by the date that these collections were added. So all of these records are new. They were all recently added to Ancestry.com. And so by sorting them this way, I can log into Ancestry, go to the card catalog, and identify which are the new record collections that have just been added. So for example, if I have ancestors from England that I want to research, this might be a place that I want to start. And this is a new collection that was not available prior. And so I can go in and get an idea of what are the new sources that might be available for my research. Hovering over the hyperlink to each of these record sets will tell me that this census was actually published yesterday. So it was first available on Ancestry.com yesterday. Another way to sort that might be of use is sorting by the date that the collection was updated. So this brings in any new additions to the record collections. So the newest addition was actually to this Australia electoral rolls, and by hovering, I can see that it was actually updated today. It's been published since 2007, but there's new information, there are new records that are now available as of today. So if I have relatives or people of interest that I'm researching from Australia, again, this might be a place that I would look. I might pull into this record collection and search. So that's just a way to sort of get an idea of what exists in here, but you're not going to scroll through 33,000 record collections. So that's where this search function comes in. So I am interested in finding a death record for my grandfather. My grandfather died in Pennsylvania, and this was a death record. So I'm going to try to search for all record collections in the card catalog that include those two words, Pennsylvania and death. And so I look and there's only 4. So we've now gone from, 30,000 to 4. So a much more manageable number of collections to try to piece through. So when I look through here, I know that he didn't die in Philadelphia. I know he didn't die in Chester County. He was not a Sons of Italy member. And so I'm going to look here. When I hover on this collection, I can see that these are death certificates from the state of Pennsylvania that started in 1906. They go through 1971. This seems like a good place to start. So let's click on that collection. And I am looking for my grandfather. His name is Joseph Winans, and he also lived in that tiny town of Dimmock. And so I am going to restrict my search exactly to Dimmock. So when we search, we're searching this one record collection, this one collection of records for Joseph Winans in Dimmock. And when I search, one record comes up. So much more manageable. And when I click on this record, this is the death record for my grandfather, Joseph Winans. There's his wife, Hazel, who we just met in our last search. So again, a much more focused, much more manageable method of searching. I'm going to do one more search here. And again, we're going to search the card catalog, just as we did before. Now I want to find Joseph Winans in the 1910 U.S. Census. So I'm going to go into U.S. Census, and I think this is not under U.S. in the card catalog, but under United. And so there it is. So I have found the one card catalog record, that is the 1910 United States Federal Census. And I'm going to click on that to pull up this particular set of records. And I'm going to, again, search for Joseph Winans. And I'm going to put him exact to Dimmock again. Again, a very small town. So we're going to see if we can find him in the 1910 census in Dimmock. What we find is that there is no result for a Joseph Winans in Dimmock. So now what we can do is broaden our search. So we're going to go back to our search parameters here, and we are going to, instead of searching only in Dimmock, let's search in the county of Susquehanna. If I apply that filter, I get one record. Now this is Joseph Winans, whose parents are Elmer and Ella, and I can pull up this record, which I should, to look at the original record. But this is not my grandfather. These were not his parents' names. So let's broaden again, and we'll go to the county and adjacent counties and search again. And now we find 8 different records, including the correct record, which is Joseph Winans and his wife, Hazel, my grandmother, and their son, Joseph, my uncle. So again, using the card catalog really allows us to target what we want to find and narrow or broaden our focus as we need to. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. So again, my apologies for the back and forth. Don't forget as you're searching about using your wildcards. So Ancestry has two wildcards that they recognize. One is a question mark, and the question mark substitutes one letter. And so if you have an ancestor that you are searching for that has variable name spelling, but it's usually only off on one letter, the question mark is what you would want to use. The asterisk, on the other hand, substitutes multiple letters. And so let me give you an example of these because it'll become a little bit clearer. So I have one ancestor whose last name is Moffat. The surname Moffat is sometimes spelled with an I and sometimes spelled with an A. And so when I put into my search parameters a question mark instead of that last vowel, it will pull up results that are both MOFFAT and ending in IT. So that's a good way to use your question mark as a wildcard. The other wildcard is the asterisk. And with the asterisk, so I have another relative, John Brink Conklin, who we met earlier, and his last name is also variably spelled. And so at times I find the last letters IN, at times it's YN, sometimes it's ING. And so with him, the wildcard that I used was an asterisk at the end of the surname in order to pull up all of those variations of his last name. So you can see a number of these are IN, but it will also find ING, YN, all the other iterations as well. So again, just a reminder that as you're using these as you're doing your searches, don't forget about using your wildcards. All right, so now we've talked about filtering, we've talked about using the card catalog. One other tool that Ancestry.com has, which some people are not aware of, is they do also have location-specific pages. So you can search based on the location that you are looking for. We are now again on the general search function. So here's the general search function. If I pushed all collections, this is the page I would get to. But if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, this map comes up. And this map, this one happens to be the US. And these pinpoints are labels that tell me how many location-specific collections Ancestry houses for each of these different states. So I live in Idaho, and there are 54 Idaho-specific collections that Ancestry.com houses. One way I can access them is to just click on this pin. The other way is to go down and click on the Idaho tab, and that will take me to location-specific pages. So there are three different tabs. The first is collections, and this collections tab will show me all of this Idaho-specific collections that Ancestry.com has. So there are voter collections, there are some census records, there's some birth records, death records, military records. So again, if I'm doing research in this location, this might be a good place to start to look at what records specific to this area exist on Ancestry.com. I can also narrow that by region. I live in Boise, that's in Ada County. I can pull up a list of 5 record sets that are specific to Ada County. Going to the middle tab will actually provide some information about Idaho, some history. So here I can learn that we became a state in 1890. There's some interesting facts about Idaho. There is also a list of featured collections and the 2 famous people from the state of Idaho. Going into resources, the third tab is a really great place to go, particularly if this is a new region for your research. These resources talk about the location-specific information relative to the censuses, relative to vital records, when did they begin to be kept, where are they kept. There are hyperlinks to the areas, to the here it's the Department of Health and Welfare that keeps the records. There's a direct link there. There are also a list of Idaho research resources, including our State Historical Society and our State Genealogical Society, with hyperlinks there. So again, a really good place to try to look, and particularly if you are researching in an area that you're not used to researching. I'm going to go back to that main page, so search all collections, and we're going to go back to the map. And I want to show you that this location-specific information is not just for the United States. There are all these other tabs here that provide information about international records. You can also just move your map, and it will provide those pins that are location-specific for other areas. So let's say I wanted to research, see what information Ancestry housed about Iceland. I would just go into the Europe tab, select Iceland, and I would identify these records as the record sets that Ancestry.com houses that are specific to Iceland. One other thing that I wanted to just mention, and I have it listed here as a location-specific search, and it's not really, but I think the only way to identify these collections is to search by location. Ancestry does have some record collections that are not indexed, and so they are only available in a browse-only format. So I happen to be doing some research in the state of Washington and came across this record collection. It's a county naturalization record collection from the state of Washington. When I click into this record set, you can see that there is no search function. I can't search by name. There's only the option of browsing. And so if we go into this browse drop-down menu, it is categorized by county. So if I had ancestors or people of interest, let's say in Cowlitz County, Washington State, and they were immigrants and had been naturalized, this is a place that I might want to look. This will tell me how these records are organized. So there is a separate collection that includes applications and oaths. And then there are separate collections for declarations of intention based on year. So if I had a relative that naturalized in Cowlitz County, Washington, let's say in 1910, I could click this button and it would take me into this record collection that I would then go page to page to search for the names of my relatives. So again, just I haven't figured out any other way to identify these browse-only record collections other than when searching by location. But they are in here and they can be very useful. But if you just went into the basic search function and put in your ancestor's name, you will not be able to access this record set. Okay, so now we've talked about some of the tools that Ancestry.com has. Now let's put the pieces together. How do we actually use these to research? So the first step, I think, in any research is to have a plan, and this will prevent you from sliding into that never-ending rabbit hole. So you have to develop some kind of organized plan. This requires knowing what records you already have, and then what information you have been able to gather based on those records. And then figure out what's the next piece of information you want to know, and what records might provide you with that information. And then where would you find those records? So that's what we're going to do. we are going to talk about one of my ancestors, Celia. So Celia Schwartz, I have already gathered lots of information on. I've been able to find her in the US Census records, both state and federal. I've found birth and death records in the United States for her children. And from that information, I have been able to identify that she was born in the 1860s or 1870s. She was either born in Austria or Hungary. Celia, like most other people that we are searching for genealogically, the records are not always consistent. I know that her maiden name was Bruder. She married twice. Her first husband was Naphtali Keller. She married him before she immigrated. She immigrated to the US in about 1886 and settled in Manhattan. And she immigrated with her son, Louis. He was called Louis in the US. I don't know what he was called before immigration. Her second husband was William Schwartz. She married him sometime after 1892, most likely in New York City. In the US, her records are quite variable. Sometimes she identifies as Sally, sometimes Sarah, sometimes Celia. And she shows up in the 1930 census. She's not in the 1940 census. And so she likely died sometime between those 2 years. Of note, I have not been able to find a marriage record for her marriage to William Schwartz in the US, so we are not going to continue to look for that here now. But this is the information. These are the records I have. This is the information I already know. So really the next question is, what do we want to know next? So genealogical research really should proceed from the known to the unknown, from the most recent to the past. And so the things we really want to be able to get to are the generations before Celia. So I need to know where she was born. It's not going to be enough to search for records just putting in Austria or Hungary. And I need to know the names of her parents. So the question becomes, what records would provide that information? And then where would we find those records? So probably a good place to start would be death records. Death records often will provide a birthplace, and they often do provide the names of parents. And so the information that we have suggests that Celia was born sometime in the 1860s or 1870s, that she died sometime between 1930 and 1940. She likely died in New York City. So let's see if we can find records pertaining to that time period. So we're going to go back into our card catalog. And again, the way I got to this was search and then to card catalog right here. And we want to find death from New York City. So I happen to know that those are listed under New York, New York, and death. And so this is going to pull up any record collections in ancestry.com that contain those words. And there are 11 record collections. And so we'll look through these. But the first one looks like it could be of interest. When I hover over it, this is telling me that the collection consists of robust indexes to deaths in the 5 boroughs of New York City that were reported to the health department between 1862 and 1948. So this seems like a really good place to start. So I'm going to click into this record collection. And what this does is it's going to allow me to search only this record collection. And I'm going to put in Celia's name. And Celia would have been a Schwartz. She was married to Bill Schwartz at this time. And we're going to identify her birth year as 1935 plus or minus 5. What that does is it will pull in all records of deaths for Celia Schwartz between 1930 and 1940. And those are the parameters that we know from our census records. I'm not going to put in a location because I don't know which of the 5 boroughs she died in. This is only going to pull in New York City death records anyway, so it will be one of those 5. So let's search. And what we'll find here, again, by filtering our just to this record set and providing parameters for her death, we'll get 26 records that could be our Celia Schwartz. So it's not one, but it's not 30,000. And when we go through these, just hovering over the hyperlink should provide us with enough information to figure out which one is our Celia. So I know that it's this one. When we look at the information provided here, we can see that this is Celia Schwartz. She was born in Hungary. Her father's name was Samuel Bruder, and we knew from prior information that her maiden name was Bruder. This is providing her mother's name as Sylvia Sigler, and her spouse was William Schwartz. So this is our Celia Schwartz. So let's try to take a look at this record. So I've just clicked into the record, and what's provided on the right-hand side here is the index. So someone has gone in, some of these are done now by optical character recognition, some are by hand, but there has been some inputting of information from the actual record. But there is no image, so there's no way for me to get from ancestry.com an actual image of the original. They do have a way for me to purchase the original, but not actually to see it. So what we do from here is this provides some information, but we really want to be able to get into the actual record. So let's find out where this record came from. So there are two tabs here. One is the detail of the record, and the other is the source of the record. So by clicking into the source, I can see that these records came from nyc.gov. And if I want to learn more about this record set, I click there and I'll pull to the bottom of this page, and I can see that if I want to obtain a copy of the records, I should visit this site. So I'm going to click there, and I'm now in the nyc.gov site. And this is a site definitely to remember if you have any people of interest that you are tracking in the New York City area. The city has done a really great job of digitizing and making available vital records. They live under historical records in this genealogy tab. So they are on this hyperlink. This is the New York City Historical Vital Records Project. And they have digitized over 10 million vital records for the city of New York City. They're on their way to 13 million, so continue to check back. There are a couple different ways to search on this website. We actually have on that index information about her certificate number. So we can search by certificate number. This is not a birth record, but a death record. Her certificate number is, I copied this from before, 6528. She died in Brooklyn, in the borough of Brooklyn. If it was not Brooklyn, there would be the option to switch it to a different borough. And she died in 1938. Searching here will provide the death record for Celia Schwartz. So one record results, it is her record. What this scan of the original is telling me is that Celia Schwartz died in Brooklyn. She died at 67 Hanson Place, which was a tenement. She was a 62-year-old married female. Her husband's name was William Schwartz. She died on March 24th, 1938. Information here about her diagnoses. And here on the left, we see that she was born in Hungary. She'd been in the US for 50 years, and all of those years in New York City. It provides the information that her father's name was Samuel Bruder, born in Hungary. Her mother's name was Sylvia Sigler, born in Hungary. The informant, the person who provided this information, the information on the left-hand side of this document was her son. Her son is not named here, but that knowing that this is her son will allow us to make some observations about how accurate some of this information might be. Also provides that she was buried at Mount Hebron Cemetery, the date of her burial, and then on the second page, you can see this document was signed by William Schwartz, her husband, and he is listed at 67 Hanson Place, her place of death. So she likely died at home. So a lot of information provided. We now have some information about her parents' names. Okay, so now what? What do we want to know next? Well, we still don't really know where she was from. Hungary is a big place. It's not very specific, and it would be very difficult to identify Celia Schwartz just searching Hungary. So what records would provide the information about her place of birth or her place of residence before her immigration? And then where could we find those records? Well, it would be very nice to find her passenger manifest. But one challenge, one obstacle is we don't know what name she would have used on the passenger manifest. We have her as Sally, Sarah, Celia in her US records, and none of those might be what she traveled under because none of those might have been her name prior to her immigration. So now we're trying to figure out what record might actually provide her birth name, her first name when she was born. Well, Celia was Jewish, and the Jewish tradition for Ashkenazi Jews, Jews from this part of Europe, is that their headstones often contain the name both of their father and their own Hebrew name. And the Hebrew name is usually the name that European Jews would use on official documents. And so it's likely that the name that she has on her headstone might mirror the name on a passenger manifest. So let's see if we can find her headstone. So I am going to click here and we're going to get back to the card catalog and we're going to try to find her headstone. Well, I think many of you are probably familiar with Find a Grave. Find a Grave is kind of a crowdsourced repository that includes information about cemeteries and where people were buried, and it often will provide images of the gravestones. And if it doesn't provide an image, you can request an image through a Find a Grave volunteer. So Find a Grave is its own freestanding website, but it is also in Ancestry. So if we put in Find a Grave, so again, we're back in our card catalog. We just want to search the Find a Grave repository, the Find a Grave record collection. 11 things come up. They are specific to country. And so we're going to go to the US Find a Grave record collection. And we're going to put in Celia Schwartz. And we know now that she died in 1938 exactly. And we know she died in Brooklyn. And exactly. And we can even put in her cemetery and search. And when we do this, we get one record, and that record is our Celia, and she does have an image of her headstone. So when we look at her headstone, lists her as wife and mother, lists her date of death. The Hebrew can be translated to Sertel, daughter of Abraham Zalman. So now we have both her Hebrew name, Sertel, and her father's name of Abraham Zalman. So now we can go back and look for her passenger manifest. Now we can identify that it was probably something like Sertel. Last name when she immigrated was Keller. She was married to her first husband, Naftali. She immigrated in about 1886 and settled in Manhattan. And she likely immigrated with her son, Louis. So this is all information that we have either found just in the last half an hour or have found in our record searches prior to this through her census records and her children's birth and death records. So let's go back into Ancestry and see if we can find her passenger manifest. So for this search, I'm going to search immigration and travel. So this is filtering just by the basic search function. I'm going to look through all of the immigration and travel record collections that ancestry.com houses. So this provides me with a search function just looking at all of these record sets that pertain to immigration and travel. Now, the first name Sertle is spelled variably depending on what record set you're looking at, and a lot of times it depended on the nationality of the location. There were a lot of changes in this region of Europe throughout the decades. And so I'm going to use a wildcard. Sometimes I've found records that start with a T, sometimes with a C, sometimes with a Z. So I'm going to put in our asterisk and then Ertl. So that'll pull up something that looks like Sertle. And we think she immigrated under the name Keller. And she arrived in about 1886. And I'm not going to put in any other parameters, but this is going to search all immigration and emigration results for Sertle Keller. And there's one. So one record to look at. It's a passenger list from Hamburg. So a departure list of passengers that were leaving from Hamburg, Germany. And when we look at this record, we can see Sertle Keller, age 19, traveling with Labish Keller, age 3. And their last residence was a town called Regiatov. So this seems to be our Celia Schwartz, Sertle Keller, and her son Louis, here called Labe. So this is a map of a present-day map of where Regiatov lives. So this pinpoint is the city of Regiatov, and it is right on the border, very close to the border of Poland and Slovakia. But one thing to remember is that Poland and Slovakia were not around at the time that Celia Schwartz would have been born. All of this area, this is a map from 1914, was actually part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so the fact that records say Austria and records say Hungary, these are consistent with the fact that all of this region was actually owned by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So now we know that Sertle Bruder was probably her name. She was born about 1867. She immigrated from Regiatov, which is present-day Poland, in 1886 with her son Labe. Her father was Abraham Zalman Bruder. Her mother's name sounded something like Sigler. So now let's go in and try to find her birth record. And I am aware of the time, so we're going to try to be efficient in our searching here. So we're back on the general search page, and this is the page that if we scroll down to the bottom, we can get to the location-specific information. Now we're going to skip the US because we're looking for information in Europe, and the first place to start would be Poland, and I can tell you that I looked in Poland and there were no records that seemed to be helpful for this particular individual. She was very close to the border of Slovakia, and at the time she was there, there would not have been a border. And so it makes sense to go in and see what records exist in Slovakia. When we do this, again, this is a location-specific page that lists the record collections that are held by Ancestry.com that are specific to this location of Slovakia. And this record set is of interest. There is an index of Jewish citizens in the census in 1869. We're going to click on that. And this will allow me to search just in this census. I'm just going to broadly look for the last name Bruder. let's see how many brooders there were in the 1869 Hungarian census, and there ends up being 55. Again, we can look through here and see, does anything look like a sertal? Here's one record that looks like it could be a sertal. The last name is unfamiliar, and she is too old to be our person of interest. It would make sense to look at that record. Time won't permit that right now, but we're going to leave her and go to the bottom of our list. And we see that there's a couple of individuals here who could be our sertal. So again, it's not exactly correct. We look, and all of these individuals at the end of our list are from the same town, Kraina Polyana. And so it would be of interest to see if this was all the same family. By hovering over their records, we can see that they've been identified as family number 1508. And if I went down to the bottom of this list, they are all part of family 1508. It is of interest that the oldest male's name is Zalman. Again, we have from the gravestone Abraham Zalman. If we go to the next record, which is the oldest female, her maiden name is Sigler. So again, similar last name as what was identified on the death record. We can actually pull these records up, and we're sort of in that same problematic area where there is no image. I can't even purchase an image. So this requires us again to look at our source material. So I've just clicked into the source tab. I'm going to go in and learn more about this record set, which was actually provided to ancestry.com by Jewish Gen. Jewish Gen is a Jewish genealogy site. And if I click to the very bottom, it's telling me to proceed to the 1869 Hungarian census link on the Jewish Gen website. So when I go there, I'm now clicked into the Jewish Gen website. The information provided here tells me that these records from these particular counties in Slovakia, today's Slovakia, Old Hungary, have actually been digitized, and they're available on the Family Search website. So I can now look at this list. I see this district or this county of Saros. Saros is the county identified on the indexed information that we just saw from our ancestry.com search in Slovakia. So I can now go into the family history library and look specifically for this record. I think I'll probably stop there just because I think we're running short on time. I want to leave enough time for questions. But again, just with a little bit of information, a little bit of targeting research, you can actually find lots of information. This is actually the census record. And from that record, we were able to learn a lot about the Bruder family from Kraina Polyana, including about Circa, who is likely our sertal. So again, just with a little organization in your research, some targeted searching, really identifying what records you want, a lot of information can be identified. In your handout, I have also included a couple of links for other parts of ancestry.com that might be of interest. There are some videos that are available that are instructional. There are some written articles that are available. So look to the handout for that information. And I think I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up.
Thank you very much. We have lots of good comments in the chat, and people are excited to start using some of these strategies. So
Great.
our first question, somebody is asking if you have used the new feature that allows you to prioritize a particular ancestor, and if you've used that, how have you found it useful?
Yeah, so I have played around with it a little bit, and I think it just allows you to bring those more to the forefront. But I have not found it. Uh, it's not a part of my work routine. I don't think I've been able to incorporate it in a way that has been particularly useful for me.
Sounds good. Thank you. Our next question relates to name spellings. So this person uses the example of the last name Voigt. Sometimes it has a GHT ending, sometimes there's no G, sometimes no H. So if you put a question mark in between those letters, do you get all all of the variations, all three of the variations, or
Yeah,
how
so
would it be best to search for that?
sometimes with names that are quite variable, it takes some trial and error to figure out what's going to, just like you saw, we really narrow the focus and maybe that's too narrow, so we need to come back. It's sometimes similar with these wild cards. Sometimes it takes some trial and error. The question mark will only substitute one letter. And so you can't substitute GHT. You can substitute G for any other letter. If you, instead of putting the G in, you put the question mark in. If you want a substitution for multiple letters, you use the asterisk. And that way, wherever that place mark is, that could be one letter, it could be many letters, it will pull in all of the pertinent records. So hopefully that makes sense. And there are some challenging names that does take a little bit of trial and error to figure out what's going to provide you, not 30,000, but not zero.
That's helpful. Thank you. So, looks like we have time for a couple more questions. And just as a reminder, if you have a question that pops up later, or if you would like a copy of the chat, please send us an email at genealogy@acpl.info. So, our next question, somebody's asking if there's a way to filter and search for race-specific information.
For race specific, some of the, I think it depends on which record set you are looking at. So some of the information, like census records, if it actually requested that information on the record, there is often a filtering area that will filter for all the questions that exist. I'm not aware on the general search of filtering by race. I might be incorrect in that, but I think it depends on the actual record set that you were looking at.
Thank you. And we'll do one more here. So do you have advice for narrowing down search results for very common last names like Brown or King, Smith, things like that?
Yeah, those are challenging, and often it takes adding enough additional information to narrow the search. So one way would be location specific. So if you know where they were, if they happen to be in Dimmock, where there's not very many people, so as per my example, that's often helpful. Or if there was somebody in the household that had an unusual first name, that's sometimes helpful. Some of the search functions, again, depending on the record set, will have occupations in there. Maybe they had a unusual occupation. So sometimes it really does take, identifying something that is a little bit less usual, uh, and sort of going from there. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that'll finish us up for today. Again, please send us an email if you have any additional questions or if you'd like a copy of the chat. And thank you to everybody for attending. And thank you so much, Susan, for presenting. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
listening. I appreciate it.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.